Picture this. You are 7 years old. You're a boy, playing in your Christian hometown somewhere in the Balkans. Suddenly, Ottoman agents appear at your family's home. They're not seeking taxes or goods. They are seeking you. And your family, from this moment on, becomes a permanent memory. The Ottoman Empire endured for over 600 years. Its dominion crossed 3 continents, holding the destiny of millions in its grasp. We remember it for its astounding architecture, its formidable sultans, and its tactical genius.
But hidden behind the gilded exteriors of its palaces and the triumphalism of its conquests were sexual customs, so profoundly unsettling that even contemporary witnesses struggled to set them to paper. And these were not random acts of depravity. They were methodical state doctrines that converted human sexuality into a lever of power, subjugation, and sheer terror. The information you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's drawn from Ottoman bureaucratic ledgers, first-hand reports from diplomats and explorers, and archaeological findings that expose how an empire weaponized the most private dimension of human existence.
Let's start with what is arguably the most psychologically shattering practice, the devshirme system, otherwise known as the child levy or the blood tax. Periodically, Ottoman agents would move through Christian villages in the Balkans, engaging in what they termed a collection. But they were not amassing coin, they were amassing children. The operation was chillingly efficient. Agents would enter a village armed with detailed ledgers. They knew precisely how many Christian households resided there, the number of boys of the correct age available, and the last time the village had provided its levy. They maintained, in effect, spreadsheets of human suffering, tracking children across the empire as if they were livestock.
Boys from age 7 to 20 were the primary targets, although the preferred age was significantly younger. Some records indicate children as young as 4 were seized. They were ripped from their mother's grasp by agents who dismissed their grief as a simple administrative cost. The selection itself was methodical and cold. Agents inspected every boy as if appraising horses, physical health, intelligence, stage of development. But this is what makes the practice uniquely horrifying. These children were not being conscripted to perish in mines or on farms. They were being conscripted to serve the empire in the most personal ways conceivable.
The most intelligent and physically appealing boys were dispatched to the palace. There, they were forcibly converted to Islam, assigned new names, and trained to attend to the sultan's private needs. The objective was not merely to acquire servants. It was to achieve a complete psychological deconstruction and rebuilding. The children were instantly isolated from anyone who shared their native tongue. They were forbidden to utter their birth names or speak of their families. Any display of connection to their former life was physically beaten out of them. Within months, most could no longer even recall their original names. They were rendered blank slates upon which the empire could inscribe whatever identity suited its agenda.
But there was an even more horrific part of this. The system didn't just break its victims, it turned them into predators. Boys who endured the initial trauma and successfully assimilated into palace life were often the same ones dispatched to select the next generation of victims. As adults, they would return to the Balkans, identifying the most promising children in villages just like the one they once called home. The empire had perfected a self-perpetuating cycle of trauma.
A large number of these boys were destined for the Janissary Corps, the empire's elite fighting force. Yet even this apparently respectable path held a dark secret. The Janissaries were required to maintain celibacy and dedicate themselves utterly to the sultan. Their only intimate connections were with one another. This fostered a military environment
where same-sex relationships were not just permitted, but formally institutionalized. The empire went so far as to create a specific military unit, the Civelek Battalion, to oversee these dynamics.
This was no casual arrangement. It was an official military body, complete with its own chain of command, rules, and function. The battalion's specific purpose was to channel and manage the homoerotic relationships within the Janissary ranks, ensuring that sexual politics did not undermine military order. Historical archives describe the battalion's operations with disturbing clarity. Its members enjoyed privileged status and had access to resources denied to other soldiers. They were, in effect, professional companions for high-ranking officers. Their military function was indivisible from their sexual role. The empire had engineered a system where promotion could be contingent upon sexual compliance with one's superiors.
The Devshirme system, however, had an even darker application. The most beautiful boys, those judged too aesthetically pleasing for the military, were segregated for an entirely different life. These children were bound for the palace's private chambers, to serve the sultan and his courtiers in capacities that staggered the modern mind. A portion of these boys were castrated to become eunuchs. The procedure was gruesome and frequently lethal. The majority of castrations took place in Egypt or Ethiopia, where the Islamic legal ban on the act could be bypassed by compelling Christians or Jews to perform the surgery. The death toll was astonishing. Historical sources suggest that a mere 10% of boys who underwent castration survived. Pause to consider that. The empire was so determined to procure eunuchs that it accepted the deaths of 9 out of every 10 boys to secure one survivor. The arithmetic of this policy is chilling. To acquire 100 eunuchs, they were prepared to mutilate 1,000 children, passively accepting 900 deaths as a statistical cost. Those who survived faced a reality many deemed worse than death. Boys from Africa typically endured the removal of all genitalia, becoming black eunuchs. They were deemed more reliable around the sultan's female harem and often ascended to posts of immense power within the palace. European boys from the Balkans, meanwhile, usually underwent the removal of only their testicles, becoming white eunuchs, who were primarily assigned to bureaucratic and administrative duties. The psychological toll on these children is impossible to overstate. They were not just physically maimed, but also permanently cut off from any chance of normal human connection. They could never procreate, never marry. They existed as living tools for an empire that had expropriated everything from them, down to their very humanity. Yet, castration was not the only destiny awaiting beautiful boys. Some were designated as Köçek dancers. These were young male performers who cross-dressed as women to provide entertainment at festivals and private parties. These boys inhabited a disturbing liminal space between genders, seen by Ottoman society as neither fully male nor female. The audiences at these events were infamous for their violent outbursts. Historical accounts detail how men would become so inflamed by the young dancers that they would erupt into brawls over the chance to sexually assault them. Glassware was shattered, voices were lost from screaming, and attendees were sometimes killed in the mayhem surrounding the shows. The dancers themselves had no recourse against this violence. They were required to submit to any and all advances, their bodies treated as public property for drunken, aggressive crowds. Perhaps most disturbing of all was a practice known as the Tavşan Oğlan system. The term translates loosely as bunny boys, a diminutive euphemism that fails to mask the horror it describes. These were young Christian boys, often Greek or from other European territories, procured for the palace for the express purpose of gratifying high-ranking officials.
Unlike other palace roles, the Tavşan Oğlan system was shrouded in absolute secrecy. These boys held no official rank, had no legal protection, and possessed no hope of promotion or eventual freedom. They existed purely as companions for the ruler's private indulgence, concealed from the public record. This was not a matter of cultural relativism or differing morals. This was the systematic exploitation of minors, organized and protected by the highest echelons of the state.
Looking beyond the child levy, we find another stratum of Ottoman sexual exploitation operating on an even vaster scale. The empire's approach to female sexuality fostered a marketplace for human flesh that dwarfed anything in the contemporary world. This was not merely a matter of concubinage or marital customs. This was the methodical commodification of female bodies on an industrial level. The slave markets of Constantinople functioned with the efficiency of modern enterprises. Women were sorted, appraised, and sold according to a complex hierarchy. African women fetched different prices than European women. Virgins were valued higher than non-virgins. Young girls commanded premium prices over mature women. The empire had formulated elaborate pricing models for human sexuality. The surviving documentation reveals the cold arithmetic of this commerce. A standard African girl might be sold for 1,500 to 2,500 kurus if her purpose was domestic labor. But if she was intended for sexual use, the price could easily double or triple. European women, especially from Greece or the Balkans, commanded even steeper prices. The most valuable category was reserved for odalisques, women specifically groomed for sexual service in the imperial harems. These women could be sold for tens of thousands of kurus. Their worth was dictated by their beauty, their training in the arts of pleasure, and their perceived fertility. The empire operated training centers where captured women were taught seduction, massage, and sexual performance, methodically transforming traumatized captives into polished commodities. But behind every transaction was a human being, ripped from her home, stripped of her name. And the imperial legal system offered these women zero protection. A man could sexually utilize his female slaves without any legal repercussions. If a slave woman conceived, her children were the exclusive property of her master, who was free to sell them, kill them, or use them as he pleased. Constantinople alone was home to hundreds of thousands of enslaved women at any given moment. Military campaigns were formulated not just for territory, but for human plunder.
The romanticized image of harems as luxurious sanctuaries filled with pampered concubines is a historical fiction. The majority of harem women lived in a state of perpetual terror, competing ferociously for the notice that might elevate them from simple slaves to favored partners. This competition was intentionally engineered by the system's design. Women were pitted against one another. They were incentivized to spy on each other, to sabotage their rivals, and to form fleeting alliances that could be instantly broken. The empire had manufactured environments where the natural solidarity between women was perverted into a weapon of mutual destruction. Perhaps most disturbing was the fate of infants born within this system. The empire's own records indicate that infanticide was rampant, especially for children born to African mothers. The mixed-race offspring of these unions were frequently killed immediately upon birth, their existence deemed an inconvenient complication in the machinery of sexual exploitation. Contemporary visitors noted the conspicuous absence of mixed-race children in Constantinople, despite the clear presence of thousands of African women in sexual relationships with Turkish men. The conclusion was unavoidable. These children were being systematically eliminated. Women who survived long enough to become undesirable faced fates often worse than death. They might be sold off to brothels, discarded on the streets, or quietly killed to make space for younger replacements. The empire had no penchant for used concubines.
So how could a society like this even function? This is the most chilling part. It was all considered normal. The law stood firmly on the side of the oppressor. Harming a free woman was a capital offense, but harming an enslaved woman resulted only in a fine, as if she were considered property. The empire had codified a two-tiered system of human value, making exploitation not just permissible, but economically justified. This wasn't some hidden shame. It was the driving engine of the empire's wealth. The slave trade formed the backbone of imperial finance, funding wars, palaces, and the entire bureaucratic system. The empire's prosperity rested on the systematic erosion of human dignity across 3 continents. And the emotional impact spread everywhere. Families lived in constant fear that their children would be taken away. Parents, in their desperation, would sometimes harm or disfigure their own sons and daughters, scarring faces or breaking limbs to make them less appealing to imperial collectors. A society had emerged where loving parents felt compelled to act out of terror, believing it was the only way to protect their children. How do we know all this? Because the Ottomans were meticulous record keepers. They maintained ledgers listing the ages, origins, and prices of enslaved people. They kept inventories of palace households, cataloging individuals as though they were objects. These records still exist today in archives across Turkey. They are undeniable evidence. The empire's own officials documented their actions with the same bureaucratic precision they used for taxation. They felt no guilt, because the entire system around them had normalized it. The last Ottoman sultan was deposed in 1922, within living memory. This history is far closer to us than we often imagine. The romanticized image of the empire is a myth. The reality, preserved in its own documents, reveals a machine, a system built to exploit and dehumanize that operated with chilling efficiency for centuries.